Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear subject. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm doing great. Another week, another episode. We love doing these shows for y'all. Hopefully you're enjoying them. We've got a number of new 5-star reviews on iTunes and other platforms. If you're enjoying the show, please take time to write us a review. And if we should be doing something different or better, don't hesitate to reach out and let us know that as well. Lots of good questions and ideas for the show coming in also. And someone said something about us covering some of the top mistakes that student pilots make. And lo and behold, we found an old article, and we're gonna borrow this article and talk about our thoughts on some of these things. In Flight Magazine, which is it's actually called Flight Training Magazine from the AOPA, still the one that I get in print. I much enjoy it. It has a lot of good things in it as it relates to flight training. So if you're not a member of the AOPA, go register. You'll get the magazine for free, either in print or electronic. But way back in January of 2018, there was an article written, 10 mistakes that student pilots do wrong. And we're going to talk about those. Wally, as an examiner, I know you see a lot of things that go wrong. Let's jump right in. We've done some of these topics, but we'll go through all 10 of them. What's number 10?
Number 10 pertains to checklists, and lo and behold, we have done an episode on checklist usage. It is something that is required to be graded or evaluated, rather, I should say, on a check ride. Pretty much on all the landings, all the takeoffs and everything down there in one of the elements that I'm supposed to be looking at is proper use of checklists. And it's pretty simple. If you don't use a checklist, you're obviously not properly using it. So I see occasionally on check rides that applicants are, especially for a landing checklist, they're just using GUMPs, and they're going through it in their mind, but there's not a checklist anywhere close. And that's really a bad habit pattern. And I know on maybe a Cessna 172, especially a fuel-injected one, where carburetor heat is not introduced to the scenario, there's really not a whole lot to do as far as landing, as far as checklist items. But it's a habit pattern. It's something that is required, and it's something that's expected. When you get a job flying a big airplane, especially at an airline, checklists are used. They're used every time. I fly big airplanes, and some of our checklists only have 3 items on them. And I have it memorized, but I still pull out the checklist, and I look at it, and I read it, and I respond to it appropriately. So it is a big item. You're not going to fly the same airplane all the time. You may fly an airplane that now has cowl flaps. You may be flying a fuel-injected 172, and you're used to that. But today you're flying an N model, and you've got carburetor, so you got carburetor heat to be considered, and that's all on the checklist. Landing lights, just everything that's on the checklist it's there for a reason. So it's something that we need to do better with.
Yeah, and I think as a student pilot, when I was training, I did get lulled into this fact that I'm flying these same planes. The school when I was going here only had 172, so I was always flying a 172. It was all tricycle fixed gear aircraft. You could get lulled into that, but I've flown a lot of different types of aircraft now, and if I only thought of those items on a 172 NNP models, then if I did, like you said, flew anything else, then I could get myself in trouble or hurt pretty quick.
Right.
So number 9 on this list is poor weather planning. I find that to be something that I find myself chasing people down and talking about. on a regular basis at the flight school. People learning how to fly, they want to go. And they just, I don't think, as much as we talk about it, I still don't think students understand the dangers of what weather can do to us, and that weather, as you're a pilot and you fly, weather's not necessarily the same 3 or 4 miles from here. What we can see here might not be what's going on 3 or 4 miles away. And it's shocking. I think I've told the story of trying to fly to Brenham to see my dad, not that far away. Didn't do a weather briefing or really understand all about the weather past this airport, and get out there and be a wall of clouds just 5 or 10 miles away, and have to do, quote unquote, a holding pattern out there for a 30-minute time, hoping they would burn off, but they never burned off. And I wasted a lot of avgaffs and a lot of my time trying to get somewhere that I could have solved for that if I would have just looked at the weather.
Yeah, at some point the weather changes. At some point the weather's good here, and across the street it's bad. There's a line somewhere. And a lot of times we do get lulled into the fact of, well, geez, I'm only going 50 miles. The weather's got to be fine over there. And if there's that front is somewhere, if that front is halfway in between, we may have southerly winds here and northerly winds over there, or at some point the clouds move in. It may be clear here, but it may be 800 overcast over there. So it is something that we can certainly do better with and be aware of it. And again, AOPA says this is number 9, poor weather briefing. So get in the habit of using different sources to get a weather briefing. On a check ride, I will always ask the applicant, okay, we're going from here to there. How's the weather? Okay, and they a lot of times the answer will say, well, the weather's great. And I will say, okay, well, tell me how you got your weather briefing. There are many different options. There's, using your EFB. There's actually calling the weather briefer and talking to somebody. And then there's lots of online options to get a good weather briefing. And more times than not, I would say my applicants use more than one source. And that's always a good thing, because especially if you talk to a real weather briefer, you sort of get a second opinion.
And I think that intimidates a lot of student pilots and even private pilots, because they might not know what to say. Those people are very helpful. They're service oriented. I would not hesitate one bit to call for a weather briefing, because it's going to provide more information than you seeing what PreFlight's telling you, or you seeing what the aviationweather.gov is going to tell you. The person on the other end probably knows weather pretty good, and probably will give you some ideas on whether they would go or not go in that current sort of situation.
Right, and I will tell you, I'll date myself a little bit, but there used to be a commercial for washing machines back this is probably in the 70s. I think it was a Maytag commercial, and the whole idea of the commercial is that the Maytag repairman doesn't have a whole lot to do, because Maytag appliances never break down. And when I was a CFI a long time ago, or actually actively teaching a lot, we used to refer to some of the guys at some flight service stations as the Maytag repairmen, because you could tell that they didn't have a whole lot to do, and when you'd call them up for a weather briefing, you could almost feel like they were excited to do it for you.
Oh yeah,
and that's the way these guys are. So they will. I have seen applicants say, I'm going to call to get a weather briefing, and 30 minutes later they come back and say, wow, I'm worn out. The guy gave me a whole lot of information. So it's a good thing to talk to somebody.
Number 8 on the list is not enough rudder on takeoff. Now, I'm part of the show, so I happen to know we're going to talk about left turning tendencies in an upcoming episode, but obviously this is going to prevent some of those left turning tendencies on the go. I can remember, and I still see it. If you go look at people taking off out here, you probably won't want to own a flight school if you watch a bunch of landings and takeoffs at this airport, but not enough right rudder on takeoff. What are your thoughts there, Wally?
Well, we did an episode a few back about flight controls, and I talked a lot about, in that episode, we talked about crosswind landings, and you can use the same verbiage that we used in that episode and talk about, the proper amount of rudder on takeoff. What does it take? How much rudder does it take on takeoff? And the answer is whatever it takes.
Yep.
Keep that airplane on the center line. Obviously, a big high power engine is gonna there are going to be more left turn tendencies. I fly a Saratoga, Piper Saratoga, 300 horsepower engine, big airplane, and when I get in there with somebody who's not used to the airplane, they push the power up, and that's usually the first comment is, "Wow, it takes a lot of right rudder. You got 300 horses out there trying to get you off the runway, and we've got to fight that." So whatever it takes is how much rudder you need to use on takeoff.
Yeah, and just something that as a student and for the instructors listening, you just got to keep practicing and keep telling, so to make sure that it's happening, just to counteract those forces. Number 7, poor use of airport diagrams. This is one that I'm definitely was a victim of. I think I've changed my mindset on it as I got to my commercial rating, and I've flown to a lot of different places and a lot of new places. Again, I think it's a tendency of the way we teach nowadays, Wally, that most private pilot students fly at one or two airports. They do the same cross country 2 times and then one long one that probably also includes the same airport they've gone to. So they're passing their check rides, and they've maybe been to 5 airports, and they probably know those airports fairly well. 2 maybe towered, 3 probably not towered, which means they've got a runway and a taxiway, not too big of a deal. But you go land a twin engine plane at a professional big airport like Austin Bergstrom, where big jets are flying in all the time. There's multiple taxiways, there's many exits, there's multiple runways. You're going to have to use an airport diagram, or you're going to look or sound stupid and need some progressive help.
Yeah.
But they're easy to get. They're online. If you're going to go, print them out, highlight what you think's going to happen, right? I'm going to exit midfield. If I'm in a single engine plane, probably going to exit before midfield.
Yeah.
And then know you're going to have to taxi. Have that drawn out.
Yeah. Yeah, and this a little bit goes back to the checklist. The first element of properly using an airport diagram is to have an airport diagram.
Yep.
If you don't have it, obviously you're not using it. But I know it. With my airline job, we are required to brief the exit, the taxiway that we expect to exit the runway on, and our taxi plan into the gate. And sometimes it's complex, and sometimes it doesn't go as we expected, but we do have a plan. We basically have a default plan, and I usually highlight it on my diagram on the iPad, so I have an idea. And a lot of times air traffic control will tell you what exit they want you to attempt to make off of the runway, because a lot of times it's not the first exit that you come to. They may say plan to exit Charlie, and Bravo is before Charlie, and you could make Bravo, but for whatever reason they need you to go down to Charlie. So again, the first way to properly use it is to, obviously you got to have it with you, so be ready for that.
Number 6, rushing the pre-flight. Now, I'm sure, Wally, as a DP, your students or the people that are being examined aren't rushing. They're showing you their best day ever pre-flighting an aircraft. But it's something that can happen. External forces get us to where we're in a hurry. We have a time to be somewhere. Something happened that held us up, and now we're running a little bit late. We rush. Lots of really bad things can happen. We've talked about some of them in previous episodes, but I think we should follow the checklist, the one that's in the POH. Hopefully we've copied it or using something that follows that, and we check everything on the outside, everything on the inside, and make sure we're really ready to go.
Yeah, and as an examiner, I tend to almost see the opposite. It's not unusual to see 30-minute pre-flights, and I'll usually debrief the applicant. I'll say, look, I know that's probably not really what you're doing, so you're putting on a little bit of a show for me, and I get that, but don't skimp on the pre-flight. I mean, you could be in an airplane, maybe a 182 or a 172, or even a Cardinal that doesn't have struts, something that you need to bring a ladder over to check get up there and check the fuel. Don't skimp on that. We I think asked our last a couple episodes ago, we asked our mechanic guest, Ray, if you could only pre-flight one thing, what would it be? And he said, well, no question, it would be the fuel.
No doubt.
And so, yeah, don't skimp on the pre-flight. Get there 30 minutes early, and take care of that.
Number 5, selecting cruising altitude, something we all learn, but as we mentioned before we started recording, some pilots might not ever fly above 3,000 feet before they earn their license. They might have done their cross country with a 3,000 foot ceiling and flew over wherever they're going, 2,000, 2,500 feet, and maybe have never been above 3,000. I don't know that I ever was above 3,000 before I passed my private check ride. But if at a busy airport like this, if you listen to the radio long, you'll hear people requesting the wrong altitudes on flight followings based on direction of travel. The controllers are quick to correct them.
Yeah.
And you might hear them not requesting an altitude if they're requesting a flight following. And it's really one of those mechanisms that keeps us safe that you really need to understand and know. I fly IFR a lot now that I'm an IFR pilot. I just file a flight plan and I get told what to fly. I, of course, request something, but that's pretty easy. And when I'm filing that flight plan, PreFlight guides me because it knows where I'm going.
Right.
I fly VFR and request a flight following. I have to take a deep breath before I open my mouth because it's been a while since I've requested that number.
Yeah.
And I use a saying that I learned that is one that helps me, might help you. East is odd and west is even odder. So you know that east is an odd altitude and west is even odder. So you know west is an even altitude. Just something that has helped me remember so that I don't ask for 6,000 when I'm going to Austin, because it's a well, that would be right. That's a westerly heading, but I don't ask for the wrong thing, if you know what I'm saying.
Right. And I have inadvertently filed for the wrong altitude, and air traffic control very graciously says, hey, you're filed for 5,000. You're going northwest. You want 4 or 6, and you kind of swallow your pride for a second and say, 6,000 would be good.
Yep. You give us 4, 3, 2, 1. Wally, what's number 4?
Number 4, staring inside the cockpit. A lot of the airplanes that we have today have a lot of cool stuff inside the airplane. A lot of information. But there's a lot of really nice stuff outside the airplane too. And
there could be really bad stuff right outside the airplane.
Exactly.
That we would like to see before we make contact.
Exactly. I think I mentioned this in a previous episode. Back in the summer, I gave on 2 consecutive days check rides in a brand new SR-22 Cirrus, and the next day I gave a check ride in a 1940 Piper Cub. And you talk about the difference in airplanes, and I just found myself in the Piper Cub just having a great time just looking outside. And because there wasn't a whole lot inside. I mean, I was in the back seat. There weren't really any instruments that I could see very well anyway, without really straining to look. But especially looking for traffic in a VFR scenario or IFR. I mean, there's other airplanes out there, that air traffic control may not tell you about. And there's also, now we're in a situation where we've got people flying drones, and a lot of times those drones are being flown where they shouldn't be flown. and you've got to be careful about that. Look outside the window, and one thing I try to watch on private and commercial check rides is when we do steep turns, where is their focus? Are they outside the window? I say we ought to be about 85% outside and 15% inside on steep turns, and you can vary on that, but put the nose on the horizon and find that 45 degrees of bank or 50, whatever the case may be, and keep the nose there, and you're probably going to be okay. And as an instructor, I used to just cover up the instrument panel on steep turns and force the student outside, and they usually would do much better.
That's a good tip to cover it up completely, because it does. Unfortunately, at times we might get caught lured into teaching to pass a check ride, and we're doing that as a student. We're trying to make sure we're holding that 50 or 100 feet, and we can't necessarily see that outside. But as I fly with a varying range of pilots now, when I'm flying with someone who's trying to learn how to fly, if you just pick something out on the horizon and point at that, you're probably going to fly a straighter line than any other time.
Right.
You're never going to hold a heading by looking at the compass or the heading indicator.
Right.
Not as well as a mountain or a building or a tower way off in the distance. And then and at night you just pick a good light that you can hone in on. And that's the same thing I think in maneuvers as well. If you look outside and pick something and hold it, you're probably going to have more control of the aircraft than you would by looking in at the instruments.
Right. Right. Number 3 is poor radio communication, and we did several episodes back on proper ATC phraseology and communication. This is something that the bottom line is we want effective communication, and when all else fails, just use plain English and talk to ATC. I mean, if you're up as a student pilot and you look over there and your instructor happens to pass out, get on the radio and say, I'm a student pilot, my instructor passed out, I don't know where I am, I don't know what to do. Okay? That's not...
You're going to get someone's attention and they'll understand it.
You're going to get a lot of attention. But, proper communication, I will ask a philosophical question to applicants and to students, really. I will say, if something is not right, is it wrong? And, for instance, Houston Center, Cessna 123, level at 11,000. Okay, is that the proper way to say it? No, the proper way to say it would be we're level at 1,000 rather than 11. Does it effectively communicate? It probably does. So is it wrong? Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's wrong. It's not right. It's not the exact right way to do it. So, try to say the exact correct thing to ATC. And I think ATC will pick up on your level of professionalism, and I'm not going to say they're going to treat you any differently, because I never felt that way, but it's just the right thing to do. There used to be a oatmeal commercial back in the day, and the guy said the reason you should eat Quaker Oats is it's the right thing to do. Well, that's kind of the way it is here, and especially for pilots who are aspiring to have a professional aviation career. At some point you're going to fly internationally, and that's where I believe it really becomes very important, because you're going to be talking to controllers whose native language is not English, and they might have a very limited command of the English language. So you want to use standard phraseology.
Yeah, I just refer everybody back to that episode. Lots of good stuff in there. We talked about some tools from the FAA that are out there as well to help you learn and use that phraseology correctly.
And number 2, overshooting final approach. We see this a lot, especially, as you would expect, in crosswind situations. Let's say we're on a north-south runway. I'll just use our runways here, a 17, basically a north-south runway. And let's say we have the winds at 120 at 12. And so we're on a downwind, basically flying north. The one thing that causes an overshoot on final is you're not flying a rectangular pattern. You're not flying a rectangular pattern because you don't adjust the heading on the downwind leg. So if we are, imagine a north-south runway where we're taking off and landing south, and we're making left pattern, and we have a wind coming easterly, 120, say. Obviously, when we make that downwind turn, if we fly exactly the reciprocal of the runway heading, which in our case would be 350, we're going to get blown toward the runway. And so when we make the base turn, all of a sudden we look and, whoa, we've already passed the runway, so overshooting final. That's one cause of it. Another cause may be just a poor turn. So if you're in the pattern and, you make the mistake one time, we'll make adjustments the next time. So, usually bad landings can be traced back to a bad approach. So
no question. And I do think that we work on things like turns around a point and those sorts of things when we're private pilots to learn how to counteract what the wind's doing. I think as I became a private pilot, you drive on a road, you don't have these forces changing the way you drive a car, but in a plane you definitely do. And you need to think ahead and make sure that if the wind's like that you know when you're going faster because the wind's behind you or when you're going slower, and make sure the box still looks the same because you're in control of the aircraft. The winds aren't in control of that aircraft. And then I would just say this is a very common problem because it takes time to learn how to fly a plane. But don't ever try to pull up and catch it, right? Like if you're going through final, go ahead and just keep that shallow turn in. Go around if you're not stabilized. Don't. I hate getting slow and steep in a traffic pattern, and still scares me to death thinking about it. So if you do overshoot final, just go around and try it again. It's once you learn it, you'll learn it.
Right. Absolutely. And number one mistake that student pilots make. It says 10 things student pilots do wrong, I should say. It says flaring too early or too late. I don't know how many landings I've made in my career, but a bunch, a whole lot. And I still, as I am coming into land, say to myself, look at the far end of the runway, okay? And I think usually if I find myself in a landing slump and, at the airline, that's a tough thing because I may only get 3 or 4 landings in a month, maybe even less. So you don't have the next time around the pattern to redeem yourself. But I am always telling myself, shift my aim point to the far end of the runway. Usually, if you're fixated on where you're going to touch down, you're probably gonna flare too late. Finding that sweet spot on when to flare is it's the key to a nice landing. And just keep in mind, probably a textbook landing is not always what we would call a greaser landing. We don't want to bang these airplanes in, obviously. We might hurt them or even worse, do some hurt ourselves. But, flaring too early, you're probably going to get too slow. And if you don't make the proper adjustments, you're going to hit really hard. Flaring too late, obviously, you're going to hit hard as well. So it's just something that will take practice, but just keep in mind that a firm landing is not necessarily a bad landing.
Yeah, I think that if there was one podcast or one video or one article that taught people how to land and not struggle with this flare, I would rent a lot less aircraft. I mean, it is not something that's just picked up by every pilot when they're learning how to fly. Many tips looking farther down the runway. I would seek to, if you're in training now, ask your flight instructor to do more work with you in ground effect, whether that's taking off and staying in ground effect, or whether that's on approach, getting in ground effect and staying in ground effect down the runway and go around and do it again. Once I realized what ground effect was doing and how that cushion of air was helping me and what that looked like to be looking down the runway while I was in ground effect, it really made me change my thought process on the flare, and that the flare is really that point where I am transitioning from flight to ground effect to the ground. And it just changed my whole aspect. So I share that with people, and your instructor should be able to fly the length of your runway in ground effect, and you should be able to feel that in the seat of your pants of what that feels like. But I promise to all the students that I've ever taught to who are struggling with landing, once you get it, you'll get it. And you'll struggle with it again, and you'll have issues. And as you go from rating to rating to rating, you'll have different things that you'll run into. I.e. go from private to commercial, and you do power off landings, and you got to hit a certain spot, and you maybe got a little lazy in the last year or so. You'll relearn how to do some of those things that you were doing really well on the day of your private pilot check ride.
Absolutely.
Great article, great magazine, and one of those things that we have been doing together, Wally and Bobby, as it relates to Behind the Prop. We've also been doing some free courses here at United Flight Systems. Wally is been gracious enough to offer himself to do another event at United Flight Systems and online. So wherever you're at in the world, you can participate in Wally's next seminar here at United Flight Systems called Overcoming Check Ride Anxiety. We did it once. We had a huge group of people show up for that event. I challenge you all to go to unitedflight.com/courses and register for Wally's course on February 27th, 2021. I know if you're listening to this after that date, you won't be able to see it, but we'll do more courses in the future. Go out and register for Wally's course. It is 100% free, and we decided whoever is the farthest away, or maybe people from other countries, we're going to ship out some mugs afterwards to all those that you attend from around global locations.
Right.
Currently, the podcast is listened to on 6 continents every week now, Wally, and we hope to send some mugs around the world and hopefully get pictures back of you guys taking selfies with our mugs. But that's February 27th, 2021 at 10 a.m. You can participate remotely via Zoom. So please go register for that. Anything to wrap with as we close today?
Yeah, and there will be a question and answer session with that course on the 27th. So if you've got some questions, you can, actually, if you want to email them ahead of time, that would be fine, either to myself or Bobby, Wally or Bobby at behindtheprop.com. We'll be sure to answer those in the course, because whatever you're thinking, somebody else is probably thinking as well.
No doubt. So with that, we will wrap up what turned out to be a long episode. Thanks for listening, everybody. Until next time, please stay behind the prop. Fly safe.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at behindtheprop.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.